everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, Brian, and today I'm giving you a first impressions on Dice Throne Adventures. There's also some kids playing outside, so if you hear some shrieking throughout this video, pay no attention. Nothing untoward is happening. There's just kids playing outside. It's a Saturday as I'm recording this. Anyway, this is not a full teach. A first impressions video. I'm doing kind of a whole series of these, and these are designed to put out a video when there aren't too many videos out, when a game is brand new, it's either just hit retail or the Kickstarter is just delivered, and it's a way for me to give people out there a look at the game and a look at the components and some of the gameplay to try to decide if this might be the right game for you. So I am going to show you some of the game over on the table. And after I do that, we'll come back here and I'll tell you what I think about it. Sound good? Cool. Let's do it. Seriously, let's go to the table. Now. Now, as you can see, this is the Dice Throne Adventures box, which is even bigger than the battle chests for Season 2 and Season 1 re-rolled. In fact, there are a lot of shelves that this big box doesn't quite fit on. I have a shelf where it was just a little too tall and a little too wide to fit in the cubes on my shelf in either standing up straight or down. I had to put it on a different shelf. So it's a big box. And you can see it's got the same kind of design where it looks like a big book as the battle chests. So let's open this up. There are a few things that I want to show you in here that are pretty cool. First of all, I just made a Xerox of this, but this is sort of a campaign sheet where you can track your sessions over the length of a campaign. They give you 20 slots, but generally a campaign is 8 sessions. It's going to be a dungeon crawl and then a boss, and then a dungeon crawl and then a boss, dungeon crawl boss, dungeon crawl boss. The reason that you could go more sessions is because if you lose a dungeon crawl or a boss, you basically have to keep refighting it until you win. So I guess they're just assuming you're not going to go past 20, but you could go in as few as 8 sessions for a campaign. And this feels sort of laminated, but I didn't want to write on it, so I just made a Xerox for our campaign. And as you can see, we've played the first 2 sessions. So we've done 1 dungeon crawl and 1 boss. And you've got your rule books in here. You've got a great game tray system. So over here, you've got, I'm just going to kind of show you the things as they come out. But over here, you've got, there we go. You've got this tray, which will give you you've got your standees for your characters. I actually have the pre-painted miniatures. I'm going to bring those out at the end to show you. You can put them in here, but they're so kind of nicely spaced in the boxes that they came in, and I didn't want to just throw them in here and have them all rattling around together. But you also have dice that you're going to be using here for, these are 20-sided dice that you're going to be using for loot. And then there are some dice that the bosses and the monsters will be using. And then you've got some things to track their combat points and health, as well as the gold that you get when you're going through a dungeon crawl. So that's this. This is a big tray of tokens. And if you know Dice Throne, you know that all the characters have all these tokens. But there will also be tokens being used by enemies and by bosses and things like that. So all of the tokens that the enemies will be using, or that you may be using additionally, are here in this tray, which I'm going to put up top for the moment. This is the tray that holds the loot card for the dungeon crawling. So generally, you're going to go through a dungeon crawl, and when you get to the end of that, you may have accumulated some loot cards, which you aren't allowed to look at. But you'll be able to identify those loot cards for 10 gold. You also, at the end of a dungeon crawl, will get some cards as kind of end of the dungeon crawl loot. And you'll be able to pay this amount of money to keep them depending on what type of loot they are. So it's always going to be cheaper to identify the loot that you kind of won. You just won't know what it is until you reveal it. You will know which category it falls into, however. So if you have a legendary card, obviously you're going to identify that first because you know it's probably going to be good. And then you'll just move down the line. Now, if you identified a card and you don't want it, or if you don't want any of these other kind of cards that you've gotten at the end, you can sell them for 5 gold each, and that may make it able, you may then be able to buy some of the other cards. So you won't end up with all of the loot that you've collected over the dungeon crawl. You're going to have to kind of pick and choose which cards to pay to add to your ongoing deck, but it gives you the ability to do that in different ways. And then this is the boss loot, and you'll just get some loot at the end based on what you roll. Usually with the bosses, you'll roll a few times, and so you may get a few different cards. And then these are the bosses themselves, and they're all fallen versions of characters from Dice Throne. So for instance, this one here is going to look like this, and there's an AI system set up that will allow the barbarian to purchase a bunch of upgrades before the fight starts, and then each round he will also be able to upgrade with certain cards as they come out. There's kind of an AI system that allows you to do that. So he has, his own player board here. There's one for the other bosses as well. So over the course of the campaign, you're going to do a dungeon crawl, then you'll fight the fallen barbarian, then you'll do another dungeon crawl, then you'll fight the fallen gunslinger, then you'll do another dungeon crawl, then you'll fight the fallen monk, and then you'll do a final dungeon crawl, and then you will fight the Mad King. And that's that tray. Now this is the sort of big tray of the game. So over here, we're going to have some tiles. These tiles will be used to build the dungeon. You have 4 different kinds of loot cards over here, common, rare, epic, and legendary. And if you've ever played World of Warcraft or any other kind of, MMO or role-playing game, you will probably be somewhat familiar with this kind of tiered loot system. Back in here, you've got just some player aids because things are a little bit different in Dice Throne Adventures than in original Dice Throne. So this just kind of updates you to either, have a turn order card for the boss battle or for what's called a portal crawl. That's the dungeon crawling part. You're also going to have these cards, which will come out as you're dungeon crawling. There are 4 different levels of enemies, just like there are 4 different levels of loot. You'll also have these kind of very interesting cards. And see, we're up to scenario 3. So we started with scenario 1, we played scenario 2, and next up we'll be doing scenario 3. So when we do scenario 3, which is the portal crawl, we'll select one of these cards at random, and that will tell us how we need to set up the dungeon for this dungeon crawl or portal crawl. It'll also have some things on it saying, the health that you start up with. So for this one, each character will start with 35 health, the starting gold, and then it'll tell you if you lose the dungeon crawl, what happens, and if you win the dungeon crawl, what happens. So you'll take this random kind of portal crawl that you've picked out, you'll assemble this using these tiles. So the first tile is always this one here. It's the starting space. And then wherever you have to put out, various tiles, you'll just pick them at random from among the matching types. So for here, I need 3 of these level 1 tiles. So I would just take 3 at random, and I would start to build this little dungeon. And eventually I'd build it out, with the level 2 tiles, the level 3 tiles. There's going to be a level 4 tile in this one, and there will always be this kind of final tile, and that's what you need to complete and face a kind of final boss to complete the portal crawl. And you'll have these, let's see. In any portal crawl, you're going to have these tokens on some of these tiles, which are these. And so you need to collect these different tiles so that you can then kind of fill in the 3 different faces of this die. And once you've done that, you will then basically be able to be portaled to the final boss of the dungeon crawl. Once you've then completed this portal crawl, if you are successful, if you have defeated that final boss, then the next scenario that you go to, you will fight one of those big fallen bosses. And those are always the same. So you see, if I'm doing a level 3 dungeon crawl, there's several choices. But once we go to level 4, there's only one card, and that's going to be the Fallen Gunslinger. So then you'll go to scenario 5, and again, you'll choose one of these 4 maps for your portal crawl. And when you're done with that, you'll go to scenario 6, which will be the Fallen Monk. Then you'll take one of these random cards over here. You'll do your last portal crawl. And then if you beat that, you will go and you will fight the Mad King. And I like the fact that there's some kind of randomization here, that it adds variability. There are 4 different of these cards to choose from for each of the portal crawls. And within that, there's a lot of variability in whatever tiles come out. So it feels like there's a lot of variability here, and you're going to be able to play this a lot of times, and it'll be very different each time. Keep in mind also that you're using characters from Dice Throne to do this. So that means that, first of all, you need to have some characters. You know, you could have either gone out and purchased one of the small packs and only have 2 characters and just use those 2 characters. Or you could go out and buy both battle chests and have 16 characters to choose from. And if you have both of those battle chests, there's a lot of variability and replayability when you pair that up with the different kinds of scenarios and the different tiles and all that. Not only that, there are some legacy type elements in this game. There are more tiles that are going to come out once you've finished some portion of Dice Throne Adventures. I haven't gotten there, so I don't know what it is. It may be when you finish your first campaign, or there are several different levels of difficulty for the campaign. So it might be once you finish the campaign on a certain difficulty level. There are also some cards here that are going to come out as well. And I'm assuming this is going to be more loot cards, maybe more enemy cards. The other thing that we should talk about is once you have... Oh, look, there are even more of these legacy cards, which are going to be more bosses, or perhaps more of these, perhaps more portal crawl cards. And then over here, each boss has their own deck. So when you fight, for instance, the Fallen Barbarian, you're going to take the Fallen Barbarian's deck out. And some of this deck will be used immediately to upgrade certain parts of their player board. And then the other deck, they will cycle through much as a player does, and they will get to activate powers during their turns. So all in all, there's a lot going on here, and it's pretty neat, and it's got a lot of table presence. Let me just show you the miniatures as well. So these are the pre-painted miniatures that also came with the Kickstarter, and these are very nice pre-painted miniatures. Here you go. There's the Treant. And they're also, the tray system, they sit in it very well. Here, for instance, is the Shadow Thief. Here's the Barbarian. I mean, I suppose there are miniature painters out there who could do better, but I think these are pretty high quality for pre-painted miniatures, and they look really nice. There's the Monk. But anyway, these are all the ones for Season 1 Rerolled, and these are the ones for Season 2. So I would recommend playing with these. I think they're nicer than the standees, but if you don't want to spend the money, the standees are really nice for standees as well. And the game, the artwork in the game is so good, that it's just going to pop no matter what you're using. So okay, welcome back. Dice Throne Adventures, man. It's pretty awesome. It's pretty good. Now, again, this is a first impressions video, which means that I haven't played through a lot of the game. It's generally, I make these after I've done one playthrough. I have done one of the portal crawls and one of the boss fights. So I am 25% of the way through a campaign. And my fiance Kristen and I, we are both loving this game, and I think there's so much variability between the different characters that you can use, especially considering I have both of the battle chests, season 1 and season 2, and the different portal cards, and then the different tiles that come out, and the different characters that you're playing with in tandem against the boss. There's just a lot of variability in this game, and everything about it is so well designed, it's so beautiful, and so tactile, and it has such good components and such a good game tray system. It's pure joy. It really is. Dice Throne Adventures and the Dice Throne Battle Chests are pure joy. So the purpose of these videos is not to encourage anyone to buy anything. I'm not here to sell you the game. I'm just here to show you the game so that you can decide if it's right for you or not. And I think after looking at that, the components, you should have a pretty good idea. But I can't imagine too many people not liking this game. I mean, it's a great game. It's a well-made, beautifully produced game, and it's fun to play. It is pure joy. Now, I'm not sure what's next for Dice Throne Adventures, because it seems like the Kickstarter wasn't that hugely popular, not compared to a lot of other huge Kickstarters. But I can't see anyone not liking this game, really. I mean, the dungeon crawl is accessible, and it's fun, and it's cooperative, and it's not too long. A campaign runs for 8 games. Half of them are these portal crawls. Half of them are boss fights. It doesn't feel, so long that it creates a huge barrier of entry. It feels like this is a game that, while it is a cooperative campaign game, it's also very family friendly and accessible. So I imagine that in the future, there are going to be more Kickstarters adding content to this, and I think this is going to kind of explode over time. And I'm excited for that. I'm excited for more content, even though I think the content that is there is going to last for a very long time. And I think there's a lot of variability within it. And I'm excited to play it. I'm excited to play Dice Throne Adventures with different characters and do different portal crawls. I'm excited to upgrade my character with loot. There's a very kind of deep upgrade system that evolves over the course of the campaign, and you feel that progress. You feel that leveling up. And I already feel that even 2 scenarios in, so that's 25% of a campaign. But it's nice. There's a nice feeling of progression there. There's a nice feeling of leveling up and empowering your character. But everything is done in a very intuitive, accessible, easy way. And the game tray systems help. They really kind of help implement everything. So I think this game is going to become huge as it hits retail, because I think there are so many different kind of subsections of audiences they're going to take to this game that I think it's really going to blow up quite a bit. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are more Kickstarters down the line, kind of adding in more content. I don't know if it would be a sequel or more kinds of portal crawls and more bosses and things like that. But there is a lot of room for this thing to grow. And I think the way I've seen Dice Throne itself blow up from this kind of little self-publishing project from Mind Bottling Games to being sold through Roxley and having these 2 big battle chests and now this expansion, because this really is an expansion. You need the other games to play it. Yet I wouldn't even think of this as an expansion, because it is also its own game. It's this dungeon crawling cooperative thing. So it's this weird kind of hybrid where it is an expansion, but also is very much its own game. But I see this blowing up a lot. I see future Kickstarters, future campaigns, and there's no reason not for those things, because this is a solid game, and I think this is going to be. I'm predicting that at the end of 2021, this game will be on most top 10 lists and probably at the very front of them. And I say that as a heavy gamer. I like heavy Euro games. And I think Dice Throne Adventures probably comes in around, well, let's see. Yeah, so Dice Throne Adventures comes in as a medium heavy game, but that's a 2.67 on Board Game Geek. But it doesn't feel overwhelming. Like, even though it's a medium heavy game, it definitely can appeal to lighter gamers. And as far as kind of like setup and things like that, which can be fiddly and complicated in its own right for these kinds of games, there is a little bit of, setup and fiddliness, but it's minimized by the game tray systems. So this is just a very, very accessible, pretty dungeon crawler. And the more you kind of look at it and see how the systems work, the more impressive it is, really. So I think the returns on this game are going to grow over time, and I think the popularity of this game is going to grow steadily over time. So if you have a copy of this game now, congratulations. I think you're in for a lot of fun in the future over a long period of time. And if you don't, well, you may want to consider it. And you may want to keep your eyes open for future Kickstarters. But I'm pretty sure this is coming to retail very soon, which is one of the reasons that I'm recording this video. And I don't know if you'll have things like the pre-painted minis available, but even if you go with the standees, if that's all that's available, the game is still equally as good. And the standees are really good looking standees. I mean, they still have the great Manny Tremblay art, and they pop, and they look good. So don't not get it because you don't have access to the minis. You can always find the minis later. And if this thing is as popular as I think it will become, there will probably be opportunities down the line to get the minis. But minis aside, standees, whatever, the game itself is great. So I'm hugely cheerleading this. I think if you're anywhere in the realm of thinking this game may appeal to you, you definitely need to look into it further and give it a shot somehow. So if you're new to the channel here, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you'd like to be notified whenever I publish videos in the future, you can also hit the alarm bell. Thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video. And keep your eyes peeled on the channel. There are a lot of first impressions videos coming up. And I don't know if all the games will be as good as Dice Throne Adventures, but there are going to be some really good games in there. And I'd like to be able to share them with you. All right. Take care until the next time.